All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to see so many across the refugee and host community livelihoods groups are joining this call today. My name is Allison Anderson, and I am a research and impact consultant with Building Markets. And I'm really excited to talk with you all today a bit about best practices in research with livelihoods in host communities, some common types of CSO research activities, steps within research, and how we can all increase our research capacity. Please go ahead if you've just joined, and you can select if you'd like to listen to this conversation in English or in Turkish. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a globe icon, and you can select from there under interpretation what language you'd like it to be in. So for today, our conversation, we'd love to do introductions, talk a little bit about why we're here, what is the purpose of this discussion, review some common types of research activities, discuss research steps, have some small group discussion if there's time, and then I'm happy to share resources with you all. Okay, so to begin, I'd love to tell you all a little bit about Building Markets. If you have not been familiar with our work yet or are newer to hearing about us. So Building Markets is focused on the transformational power of small businesses to address pressing social change by driving job creation and inclusive growth. So within Turkey, Building Markets works with small businesses, mostly focused on Syrian-owned businesses, but also Turkish-owned businesses, to help find these businesses, to build better market information by verifying small businesses through in-depth surveys and publishing searchable business profiles and research reports, by building the capacity of small businesses, and by connecting small businesses to the market opportunities through tender distribution, matchmaking services, and events. Our services in Turkey range from first that initial business verification, where we gather data and information on businesses and get to know them, market research, and then capacity building, and then moving into connecting businesses to tender opportunities, export opportunities, and different kinds of business development services. Across Turkey, we have almost 3,000 SMEs in our network, and we've worked with these SMEs to support them in creating over 6,000 jobs, earning over $28 million in business opportunities, and we've trained over 1,000 SMEs. So why are we here today? And that's because research is truly the foundation of all of Building Markets work. So we produce and share market research on a regular basis that's relevant to public and private sector organizations, CSOs and NGOs, and SMEs. And in 2017, Building Markets launched its first flagship report that provided a market assessment of Syrian SMEs in Turkey, and that informed Building Markets' implementation and future research agenda. And so we conduct our own research. I'm so sorry, I'm having screen sharing issues here. We conduct our own research, and we also partner with CSOs and academic research institutions. Since 2018, Building Markets has published 19 market research products. And as I said, it's really the foundation of all that we do. We do all of this work in order to bring visibility to Syrian businesses, their characteristics, and recommend policies so that we can ease regulatory burdens and reduce uncertainty for Syrian SMEs to encourage formalization and deploy Syrian capital. And you can find all of our research available on our website in Arabic, English, and Turkish, and we're always happy to discuss our findings with you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and why you're here, what your organization does, where you're based, and why you're interested in this webinar. I think we're not too large of a group, so I would love if people can just go ahead and raise their hand and maybe share a little bit about why they're here and why they're interested and what type of research your organization engages in. Yusuf, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. Hi, everyone. This is Yusuf Mustafa from Trust Consultancy and Development. We are a third-party monitoring company based in Gaziantep, and our work in the MENA region, mainly Syria, Turkey, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and some other countries like Afghanistan. I am one of the co-founders of Trust Consultancy, and I am interested in this because part of our work focusing on research and humanitarian work, refugees, IDPs, and also markets. So this will be very useful for us to have some more information about best practices in research, especially when it comes to refugees and markets. Thank you very much.
Hey, nice to see you, Yusuf. Mohammed, salam.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening. I don't know. According to everyone, this is Mohammed Salim. I am the policy unit manager of the in Syrian Dialogue Center. Actually, we have been working since 2015 on research. We are civil society organizations working on research related to Syrians, and recently we issued a report about the Syrian impact in the Turkish economy, and also we worked about a report about the labor market, Syrian labor market, and we generally interested in those topics, politically and social issues related to the refugees in general, but particularly the Syrians in Turkey. Thank you.
Perfect. So it's İrem Göl from Association for Solidarity with Asylum Seekers and Migrants, ASAM, in short. I am working as a project development unit coordinator at the moment, and why we are interested in this webinar is because we are interested in applying for the subcontracting call that you have published. And also we are trying to understand what kind of methodology that you're using for your own research so that we could develop something in line with your requirements. And about what kind of research that we are doing, actually, ASAM has been participating in many researches that includes the intersectoral protection needs analysis of UNHCR, from that to other kind of research that we are publishing on our website as well. Thank you very much.
Great, nice to meet you. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? Tell us a little bit about why you're here. And I apologize for my screen sharing issues. Are we okay? And everyone's just seeing my slides now. Thank you so much for those who've also put information into the chat. Please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I see we have a grants officer who's also looking at sub-grantee opportunities with building markets. So want to find more about organizations research. AAR Japan, this is great. Yeah, I would just love to see that information and learn more about you all. This is great. So I want to talk a little bit about why we're here and why this is an important topic to discuss research with CSOs and NGOs in Turkey. So first and foremost, it's really important that we want to learn together, that we want to collaborate and support one another with best practices in the research space. We want to use evidence across all of our organizations to support refugee and host community livelihoods programs and really advance livelihoods research. And this is a great opportunity for us to meet one another and collaborate on accessible, relevant, and actionable research to support the organizations and the individuals that we work with. And together, we want to advocate for an improved enabling environment and opportunities for greater economic inclusion in refugee and host communities. And then, of course, it's important for us to build connections between our organizations and to share research that can complement one another's work. And as you all know, being part of CSOs yourself, local CSOs have a really essential role to play in research. Broader stakeholder engagement in research really strengthens research outcomes. And local CSOs have access, local knowledge, and relationships that give CSOs a strategic advantage in conducting research. And you all have such an important role to play in communicating between individuals, the public, institutions, and policymakers. And then we know that local CSOs and NGOs are often driven by a personal commitment and connection to their country or community. So their involvement in research really strengthens research outcomes. But we also know that research is an important part of CSOs' work. CSOs can benefit from building strong research skills and creating a research agenda. So CSOs can address critical knowledge gaps by learning more, by building a stronger research skills. You can test assumptions about your work and see where they may or may not be correct or accurate. Research helps CSOs make informed decisions about your work and about the interventions that you want to engage in. And it can create evidence for advocacy efforts. And it's also very important. We know that it's important right now to work on establishing greater research skills within the local community as a part of localization efforts. So Building Markets study a few years ago on Syrian CSO and NGO capacity found that Syrian-led organizations are ambitious, they possess unique expertise, they plan to expand and grow and hire new employees, and they're keen to receive additional support. So that's one reason why we wanted to do this webinar today. And then we want to increase support to local CSOs because it enhances the impact of international assistance. So right now, despite their important role in research and work, local CSOs only receive a fraction of donor funding, and only about a third of funding goes to local organizations. And we know that local organizations have the expertise that can enhance the impact of international assistance, and they have plans to grow. And so it's important really to give additional support there so that we can all benefit from CSO's great capacity. So let's jump in to understand what are some of the common types of research activities for CSOs. So across CSOs and NGOs, we know that organizations focus on market assessments and market research. This is something we do heavily at Building Markets, often looking into different segments of the economy. So what's on a market assessment or market research, perhaps on the manufacturing sector or on the tech sector, and what that looks like in terms of future trends and the current state for SMEs. We know CSOs engage in community needs assessments to understand what are beneficiaries or community and clients' needs, case studies to see how services and implementation is supporting beneficiaries, monitoring and evaluation research, impact assessments, types of monitoring and evaluation research, media monitoring, situation reports, and perhaps other types of research activities. Yes, I see a question. By CSOs, we mean civil society organizations. So we use that as a broader term to encompass NGOs and other types of local organizations. So anyone that's at the intersection of civil society, non-governmental, perhaps local development organizations, things like that. And this is great. Please do put questions in the chat as they come up, and I can respond to them. So these are common types of research activities that we see. I'd be curious in the chat too, if there are other types of research activities that your organization engages in. And as we jump in here, would love to understand what are some of the difficulties that your organization faces in conducting research. So we have a poll available here. Feel free to, I'll put this in the chat. And feel free to, I apologize here, having some technical things. Feel free to put this web address into your phone, or use the QR code for your phone, or put this web address in. We'd love to hear from everyone on the call. What difficulties does your organization face in conducting research? And if you just go to this site that's in the chat and type in your answers, this should work, hopefully, should be populated here. Responding, data analysis. No accurate information, respondents not engaged, time is tight, doing targeted analysis, data collecting, approval from government. I see a lot around data collecting, getting the right information, access, hesitancy. This is great. This is really interesting to hear, and also to see how these themes are really emerging, similar for everyone as expected. Access to funds. Great. Well, I will, of course, share this out with everyone after the webinar. And I do want to say that we, in this presentation deck, we have a number of research resources. So we will share this out with everyone after the conversation today. So no need to write as quickly as possible. So yes, as we saw here with many of the challenges that we all face, they're very similar challenges. We see there's often not resources or time for research activities, for data analysis and writing. There's difficulties accessing that data or getting the beneficiaries to respond. Difficulty can be understanding what donors or partners want, or accessing funds to do that research. Sometimes the research questions that we're interested in are not relevant to the program goals. So the donors have some sort of program outcomes, and the research questions don't match those. Poor quality of data, too much data. What I'm hearing here in your responses is maybe not enough data, hard to access. We see difficulties having adequate writing skills for publication. As CSO and NGO workers, we have really great skills in program management and implementation, perhaps training, connecting with beneficiaries, but that doesn't always mean that we're trained in the writing skills. And we see that some research findings are not translated into policy or practice. So today we really hope to show that deliberate planning can combat some of these common challenges in conducting research. So we're going to walk through what the research, some general steps to research looks like, and then break down what some best practices in each of those steps. And you'll note that this conversation is quite a high level, looking at how one would go conducting research from sort of start to finish. And we're happy to have additional conversations if there's interest in diving in more specifically on one aspect or on one particular methodology. The steps that we lay out here are really broken down into 6 important steps in research. First is framing the research questions, then identifying the methodology that meets those research questions, gathering data, conducting analysis of that data, writing up the results, and then disseminating findings. So the first important step is framing research objectives and research questions in both research proposals and research reports. And so this is really identifying your topic. What is your vision and your motivation for the research? And the research objective clearly explains what you want to learn from carrying out the study. It can be helpful to ask, like, what do communities and organizations wish they knew? Is this research helpful to others? So what is it that you are working on, that your organization is focused on, that that you really need to know? What are real life concerns or needs to be addressed? And each study should only have a few research objectives. Once you sort of framed your topic and you say, what is it that really needs to be known? And what does the community need to know, or donors need to know about a topic? What is known already about the problem you're considering? What are the gaps in knowledge and what is needed? So here you want to explain your topic and focus. You want to situate it within the current context. So you want to understand what is the motivation for this research, what is the current context that's taking place that says that this is important. And then what has been learned from previous research, perhaps a literature review that informs the study. So what is already known and what is the gap and what is needed to know. And then once you've understood, okay, you have your topic, you have your objective, and then you understand what the gaps are in knowledge and what is needed, you really want to start developing a research question, which is a simply worded and direct question that the study will answer. And the development of a research question is an iterative process that involves continuously updating one's knowledge on the topic and refining ideas at all stages. And to do this, it's really important to remain updated on current trends, state-of-the-art research studies, and technological advances in the field you're studying. And so once you've had the topic, you've read up on the trends, you understand what the gaps are. You can also seek input from experts in the field, mentors and colleagues, to understand what some of the gaps are. And then you really want to define your research question. And something that I find is really useful is using this breakdown, FINER. Is this question and is this study feasible? Is it something that you can do? Can you access the data? Do you have access to the individuals? Are you able to get government approval? All of the items that we said can be a challenge for conducting research, looking at whether it's feasible. Is it a challenge that can be overcome, or is it something that makes it too difficult? Is it interesting? Does it fit in with your work? Does it meet the needs of the community? Is it novel? Is it has it already been studied quite a bit, or is it something new and that requires additional attention? Is it ethical? Is this something that can be ethically studied? Is there a way to access this data and answer these questions in an ethical manner? And then is it relevant? Is it relevant for meeting the needs of the community and what is important at the time? So once you've framed your research objective and identified your research questions following some of these tips we've shared there, we want to identify the methodology. And what's really important is making sure that the methodology matches with the questions you're trying to answer. And so some common methodologies for CSO research includes key informant interviews, which are a helpful way to gain firsthand knowledge from the community and hear informants' ideas based on their own experiences. Having focus group discussions, so discussing a particular topic or issue within a community. And focus group discussions really allow us to understand the different perspectives that might exist within a group or a community. We might conduct surveys or engage in participatory methodologies. But the important part of identifying the methodology is being able to answer how did you go about your research? So in very plain language, describing the methodology and how you went about doing that research. What strategy did you adopt and why did you choose that strategy? And why this strategy and not others? So when you want to defend your research, whether in a proposal in advance of conducting the research or in a written report, and you want to say, why did you want to say, like, we chose key informant interviews versus a survey for this reason. We wanted to access this data, and we thought that this approach would allow us to do it. And so really describing one approach versus the other. So next, once we've identified our clear research questions, we've set out a methodology that helps answer those research questions. We want to go about gathering data. And one thing that I find is really important and has been very beneficial in the research that we've conducted at Building Markets and also in my own research. And as a bit of background about me, I've done doctoral work on entrepreneurship, mostly focused in the Middle East and on women's entrepreneurship. But keeping a field journal of everything you're learning and observing. So whether you're conducting a survey or you are doing focus groups or qualitative methods, you want to keep a journal recording the different insights and things that you're seeing, notes you're taking. So maybe you're conducting a survey and you're seeing that, hey, actually, people are giving us different feedback on the survey that's not being reflected in our survey questions, or we need to adapt our survey questions. So really detailing everything you're learning and observing, recording all of the interviews that you're doing and transcribing. And then what's really important is building in time to reflect on your interviews, on your data gathering, and add in any observations. So something I always do, so say you have a focus group discussion or key informant interviews, is keeping like a running stream of thoughts on my prior assumptions and how they're changing. So before I go into a key informant interview, I write down some notes. Okay, here's the questions I'm going to ask, but here's sort of what I'm expecting to hear. And this helps me lay out what my biases and assumptions might be on paper or on my computer. So that's clear. And then doing the conversation, keeping a detailed notes of what I'm hearing and transcribe those conversations. And then going back and saying, how does this match with what my prior assumptions and biases were and how they're changing, and really having those notes to see that change of thoughts. And that's something that's going to help with the analysis as well. And likewise, in addition to qualitative methods and quantitative methods, this can be helpful for adjusting survey methodologies or other kind of methodologies along the way. So as a Building Markets example, earlier this year, we conducted a study on the impact of COVID on Syrian-owned SMEs in Turkey. And we wrote this robust survey questionnaire. We had outside experts look at the questionnaire. We talked to some key informants to get an understanding, in fact, perhaps some of you on this call, of what they were seeing in their work with Syrian businesses during the COVID pandemic and the recovery. And we really, we thought we had a really solid survey instrument, and we did. But once we actually started conducting the survey, we heard from many of the survey participants, these are really interesting questions, but it doesn't actually get at the heart of some of my issues right now, which is the economy. And so we took those notes and we went back and adjusted the survey instrument. And that's something that you can do when you're keeping notes and processing and thinking about your assumptions and biases along the way. So once you've gathered your data, it's important to do a rigorous data analysis and to clearly detail how you've structured your analysis and arrived at your findings. And to really guide the analysis, we suggest a few questions. One is asking, what are the key concepts I'm using in my study? How do these findings that I'm seeing in the analysis shed light on these concepts? And how do they relate back to the original research problem that I'm considering in the literature? And so as you're conducting analysis, you want to think about, how did you review the data? I'll go ahead and I'll wait for comment. Oh, here we go. Wait for comment in the chat. Evidence-based. Yes, thank you. It should be evidence-based. So we want to detail, like, how did you review your data? What parts of the research questions or problems are addressed with which data analysis? How is significance assessed? So how is data going to be interpreted? In qualitative, is this coding, summarizing your data, comparing iterations of your data? In quantitative data analysis, how is that significance assessed? And you want to keep careful notes of all of your procedures during analysis, so that you can clearly detail how you've arrived at your findings. We want to triangulate our data, which means cross-checking. So if you're seeing something in terms of a survey and a focus group, and maybe key informant interviews in the literature, you want to see, hey, are these different ways of accessing the data and answering questions? Are they all coming to the same conclusion? And if not, why not? What am I missing? What's the data missing? Like Wissam said, being very evidence-based there. And then you want to highlight your main takeaways, even if they don't seem interesting to you. And this is something that we've seen a lot in our work with CSOs. So we've done a number of CSO research projects and in our own work. And you all know the context that you work in so well. You know the clients you work with, you know the communities, you know some of the problems that they face and the solutions that have been tried to be implemented. And so because you know it so well, what you see often stops becoming interesting to you. But it's often some of the most insightful findings out of a context. So really highlighting and detailing, writing down everything you're seeing and observing. And then again, looking at some of these key questions to guide our analysis. As you're conducting your analysis and reviewing the data, there's a few different tools that already exist for livelihoods analysis that can be very beneficial. So I recommend considering some existing frameworks to understand economic inclusion. So there is comparing against some existing standards. So the UNHCR has a livelihoods monitoring framework that can be beneficial to see, here's some existing standards that exist. If we're maybe doing a monitoring evaluation project, an impact evaluation, or really understanding the state of the state of livelihoods within a community we're studying, this framework can be beneficial for saying, here's some of the areas that we want to measure against. We can look at adopting the sustainable livelihoods approach. The livelihoods approach helps organizations organize factors that constrain or enhance livelihood opportunities and show how these relate to one another. So this encourages development practitioners to look at context and relationships. So it builds a connection between people and the enabling environment. I have a screenshot here on this slide, but you can see that this livelihoods framework looks at both, individual assets, policies, institutions that support or hinder those assets, and then looks at the livelihoods outcomes, looking at income, well-being, vulnerability, food scarcity, and how livelihood strategies and some of the vulnerabilities can lean into that. And so this can be a really helpful framework as you consider your research questions, your methodology and analysis to say, hey, how do I organize the different factors I'm looking at that constrain or enhance livelihoods? And how do I better understand and frame context and relationships? And then another useful resource is the Sustainable Livelihoods handbook from Oxfam that has a number of resources there. So once you've done all of this work, you're at this key part of writing up results. And as I said before, because CSOs often know the context and topics so well, they tend to assume the reader does as well. And it's really important as we start to write up our research to not assume a reader has any background knowledge about the topic. We want to explain all of the background information, define all of the subjects that we're writing about, and fully explain why this research is relevant. And that's a really important part for drawing the reader in from the beginning. We want to structure our findings using themes uncovered during our research. So what are some of the main areas that have come out? Maybe that's doing a survey, different areas. Maybe that's matching up with some of the livelihood standards, could be some of the themes, or looking at some of the connections within the livelihoods framework. We're going to explain what we learned from the data. Okay, so here's some of the themes uncovered. Here's what we've learned from it. And we want to share how the data provides evidence for what you found. So you want to make direct links between the data and the evidence. You want to provide a summary of what you found, and then you want to explain what you think it means. So how do these findings impact policy, program implementation? How do these findings change one's thinking? You want to be detailed, specific, precise, and concise. And here, as I said, I'll send out these slides, and hopefully these will be helpful for you as you frame and write up your next research. But here's an example structure of what is useful for writing up your research in a detailed and concise way. Providing that background and context. What is the background information? What is the subject you're talking about? Why are these research questions important? How does this fit into the literature and what's already known? Explaining your methodology, breaking down your findings and data into several sections. Those can be the themes. Then discussing really what are the implications of this? What can be done? And recommendations if applicable. Once you've written up your research, there's a few tips and tricks that we follow, and you can save this just to go back through your writing once it's done. But first is writing and rewriting. The first draft is getting the data down, getting things out of your mind and really putting it on paper. But that's just the start. There's a lot of writing and rewriting that takes place. We often go through this list to look at our research and our writing and just kind of do a checkbox exercise. Are my sentences short and clear? Make sure there's not too many compound or complicated sentences. I know sometimes when we're engaging with academic writing, it's easy to start having kind of complex ways of describing our work, but that's not useful for our purposes. As CSOs, as NGOs, we really want our work to be accessible so that it can have an impact. And so we want to make sure things are as clear as possible. Removing sentences that don't serve a clear purpose, getting rid of big words, same thing. It can be very easy within our industry and our work to start using a lot of jargon, which isn't necessary. Checking to see if you've defined all of your terms. Maybe it's something that's common in your world, like how I started out talking about CSOs today without defining what a CSO was. So that's really important. Spell check. Something I often do is reading what I've written out loud. Yes, this is great with some conclusions and no symbols. Exactly. Have you explained your acronym? Have you explained what everything is? And understanding, do these figures make sense? So that's something that's really important. So now that you've written up your research, we want to talk about, yes, I will share the PowerPoint with all participants when we're done. And in the note section of the PowerPoint, you'll find a lot of links to different resources. And so I encourage you to use those resources as well. And there's not one good handbook that I've found of research methodologies and sort of research processes. So I'm hoping that this will help, but you will have to go to a few different sources. So the point of our research is really getting research to the people who can make use of the findings. The point of all of it is to increase understanding and to lead to change. So this is something that an article that I read that has guided a lot of how I think about research. This is an excerpt from a Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan, where someone says, researchers, they walk around for a while. They take some pictures, and yes, they even cry about the desolation, but then they leave again, and everything is as before. Some come for research and to write articles, but have all these writings ever changed anything about the situation? Have they brought help or at least some money into the camp? As researchers come to visit over and over again, the inner wounds of people are constantly reopened. So this is by someone who lives and works in a refugee camp. And I think this just really guides a lot of our work, whether it's working with refugees, whether it's working with other communities. The point is not to go in to open people's wounds, or, even if it's really positive, to take some of the learnings and just kind of leave with that. The point is to gather this data in a really ethical way, but in order to change something about the situation, to increase understanding and lead to change. So all of our research should be designed in a way that thinks about how is it going to get to the people who can make use of this findings. And that's important at the beginning and through the end of the process. What's the objective of the research? Is it to change a policy? Is it to change a practice? Is it to raise awareness? Once you've identified that objective, it helps you understand who is your audience and what is the right format for that audience. And then what's the context? Who's influential that needs to be on board? So maybe the right format for that audience is a very academic level paper because it is a think tank or policy audience. At like a ministry level, it's technocrats. Maybe it's a presentation. Maybe it's Instagram messages. Whatever it is, we want to think about what is our objective, who's our audience, and what's the right format to reach them. And that's important as we define all of our work. So I'd love to do one other poll. What approach does your organization currently use to disseminate research? And you can use the exact same link as before. So what approaches does your organization use to disseminate research? Short presentations to relevant stakeholders, great. Also, feel free to type in Turkish. We have translation, so someone can explain it to me. Advocacy events, information sharing via social media channels with eye-catching expressions. Yes, this is a very useful topic, a very useful approach. Putting the findings into visuals, which are more attractive to the general audience. Yes. This is something that we've really been working on and requires a different skill set. So I recommend often partnering with graphic designers or designers who are quite experienced. But as you know, working in civil society at nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, we often become experts in all the different areas of work as a necessity due to funding or staff constraints. So we're both implementing programs, doing the research, and thinking about how to put the findings into visuals, how to do social media channels, make useful brochures, arranging meetings. I love this, sharing key points with opinion leaders to reach communities. Yes, this is a great approach to disseminating findings. Infographics, launching meetings with peer learning communities. Those are great chances to share findings. I think these different ways of disseminating research speak so much to some of the goals of this webinar and this series and the goals of CSO research is really to share our findings with one another and to improve the situation that way. Great, thank you for participating. So I would love, great, I'm also seeing some comments in the chat. The format can be changed. If it's a scientific paper, yes, exactly. So really understanding your audience to understand the format. So I'd love to take a little bit of time. Again, we're not that big of a group, so I think we can just share here if people are comfortable just raising their hand and sharing to talk a little bit about what topics you're currently working on, what problems you're trying to solve, any research questions you'd like to explore in the next year, methods you think would align, and really sharing out and discussing so maybe we can troubleshoot a little bit with one another. And then something I want to share is there is a template I put here in the PowerPoint that I, again, will share out that helps break down how to build some of these basics of a research question that I think can be useful as we think about what we want to learn and focus on in the coming year. So if people are open, we can take 10 minutes here and maybe share a little bit about topics we're working on, problems we're trying to solve, target audience, and really thinking about this. Oh, and as people think about sharing, I also see a question in the chat from Mohammed about getting rid of big words. What does that mean? There are some terms we cannot avoid, like market share and market concentration. We can explain them in my footnotes. And also you indicated to mitigate the complexity of writing. Is it possible to maintain the high level writing in some parts of the research and make it simple in the executive summary and conclusion? Yes, great questions, Mohammed. Exactly, there are some terms we can't avoid. There are going to be specific technical terms that we need. And like you said, we can explain them in the bottom notes, in the footnotes. We can explain them in the text if necessary, and often it is necessary. But I don't necessarily mean getting rid of complex technical terms in terms of the important part of our work, but sometimes we use like jargon or big words to describe a basic outcome. And so sometimes we use like overly flowery language, or we get a little excited about using a thesaurus. So if there's a simpler way to say it, try to say it in a simpler way. And your question, is it possible to maintain high level of writing? Yes, so we can always maintain a high level of writing in the sense that it can be highly technical, but we can avoid really overly convoluted sentences or overly complex sentences. So can we have a high level of writing, but by taking maybe a very long sentence that's like a paragraph long and separating it into smaller chunks so it's easier to read, taking away some of the sort of like the howevers and the likewises and the conjunctions. And that can be difficult, right? Because our stream of thoughts are very complex. So often like putting it down and then saying out loud, like, is there a different way to say this? Is there an easier and clearer way to say this? And often having others read our work and asking them not to be afraid to say, hey, this doesn't quite make sense. One tool that I really like to use if you're writing in English, I'm not sure if it works in Turkish, is Grammarly. And this is an add-on that looks at your writing. It's an AI tool and says, hey, this is a little hard to read, or this is written at a very like high writing level. If you think about newspapers and magazines and presses, like the New York Times, they're generally written at a 4th or 5th grade reading level. That doesn't mean that it's not really a highly complex work or well done or evidence-based, but it means that it's written in a way that people can access it. Great questions. Suze, I would love to hear from the group on some of the topics that you're working on, and how you're thinking through some of these steps to research. Some other questions.
We should submit
Yes.
to the link, but I don't have the link. Can you share it?
Oh, I'm sorry. We don't actually have a link here for sharing. I was hoping people could unmute themselves and share. And if they're more comfortable, that can be done in English or Turkish. We have translation, or if they're more comfortable, maybe sharing in the chat. And if this is a little bit less useful, other areas that we'd be happy to discuss, just want to be useful for people today, is discussing, what has surprised people in this approach to research? Is this your approach to research? There are many ways to do research in different communities. What I laid out here is not only one way, but this is the way that we often find is useful for dealing with donors or international entities. I would love to understand what research questions people are trying to answer, barriers that they're facing, and steps of the research process that are most difficult. We can take 10 minutes to discuss. Happy to answer questions. And then I've got some resources I'd love to walk you all through as well. So feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself, whatever you're most comfortable with. All right, while we're thinking about any questions we might have or anything we want to share, let me share some resources with you all that I think can be pretty helpful. So there's a few resources I want to call out on best practices in CSO and livelihoods research. One is USAID has the Learning Lab, and this is a great website with a catalog of tools and approaches for development, including like toolkits for monitoring and evaluation. InTrack for Civil Society has a number of different toolkits and resources as well for conducting research. I put here a guide on researching violence against women. Well, this is not livelihoods focused. It's a practical guide for developing research strategy, and I find it to be really useful. It outlines quantitative and qualitative approaches to research, tools for collecting and analyzing data, and how to bring research into action. And I really recommend this resource for folks. Another resource I've linked here talks about best practices for community needs assessment and project design, and identifies how to develop a concept paper and a project proposal. So I thought this was a good resource for those of us who have these research ideas, but as we shared, is one of the issues is finding funding, some of the costs that we saw here. So really helping you identify how to write a good project proposal. I've also linked here the Sustainable Livelihoods Handbook. So this is a practical guide to researching different sustainable livelihoods methodology. So this looks at that framework that I shared earlier in analyzing our data. And then there is a handbook, a Rutledge handbook on livelihoods in the Global South. And this really looks at the evolution of research on livelihoods perspectives, frameworks, and methods. And this I found is really helpful for livelihoods research. And then here's a number of resources on research and writing in general. So I've linked here this developing a research question worksheet that I shared on the screen that can be really beneficial in breaking down what your research questions are. A document on how to write up research reports for qualitative research. Then here's a link to a number of proposal templates that can be helpful. And then here's just a few very basic writing resources, but always useful. One is the craft of writing research papers, and another is this online writing lab. with so many resources. I use this all of the time. It has general writing support, grammar, punctuation, some best practices, citation guides. This is all in English, but I know it can be adapted to other languages. And then a document on effective dissemination strategies. So I hope that these resources will be helpful for you all, and we'll get this out to you as soon as possible. I know we've shared in the chat, but for those of you that are newer to building markets as well, just a few different ways to connect with us. And that sort of ends the sort of formal walkthrough I wanted to do, but I'm really happy to have any kind of discussion, answer questions, and even just have an opportunity for people to share what they're working on, and how we can be supportive to one another. Wissam, I see a question about learning about evidence-based data analysis, how to be published, published in journals or scientific websites. Great, yes. So I think that these are really great points, and I think these are so as you see, this was like a pretty general overview to research steps, how we want to think about research, why it's important that CSOs are conducting research, and how we can work together. I think, Wissam, what you point out here would be really great for maybe some future webinars. Maybe we do something more specifically on data analysis, or how do we publish in journals or websites. I think that's great. There's a number of resources available on these topics, and if you click through some of the resources that we shared here, you'll see some things there. In terms of data analysis, yes, I encourage you all to think about like which area of data analysis is what you're working on and what you really want to learn about more, since they're all such different methods. But there are great resources available on qualitative data analysis. How might you do coding, or summarizing your data, or comparing what you find, which was very different from resources on quantitative data analysis. Maybe how you want to use data or R, or how you want to do some descriptive statistics. So those are all available, and I think maybe a good idea for us to do some additional webinars in those areas. In terms of how do we publish in journals or scientific websites, also some of what's available in the resources we link to, some of the best ways to write those research proposals, and also how to share those findings and those written reports with journals and websites. Oftentimes, if you do have research you've already conducted and written up, oftentimes you want to think about what are the journals that make the most sense to hit the right audience. So same thing, whether you're thinking about disseminating to policymakers or communities, who is the audience? What is the academic audience or policymaking audience? And who's reading what journals or websites? There I see, for example, like PubMed, Springer. So all of those different publishing houses have a number of different journals. So that could be, the Journal of International Development or Journal of Refugee Studies, etc. And so you really want to go through those websites and look at what else have they published. Like, does my research fit into the questions that they're also asking? Has somebody already asked it that's been published? Okay, that should probably be done within your literature review, but maybe you missed it in the literature review. But you want to go back through the journal and see, have they published on this topic before? Am I entering into the dialogue on this topic? And that's really important for targeting a specific journal. And then looking very tactically at their guidelines on their website of what they want to see, from what kind of questions they want answered to how long do they want their the documents to be, and looking at the other things they publish to get a good sense. Great questions. Collaborating with other centers. Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, maybe I can comment here regarding,
Please.
the marketing or the impact or the influence we want to do. As you mentioned, sometimes it is better, or maybe it is good to publish the research not only with the scientific journals, but also with institutions who are maybe close to the decision makers. Especially, for example, I think before 1 month, I just saw a research have been published by the Istanbul Chamber of Trade. And I think it is very good because the decision makers maybe trust it more than the journals or the other institutions. So maybe I think one of the most important issues, how to search about our impact or the impact of our research, and give the results or the conclusions, the recommendation to the decision makers. And this is a part I think you are doing well in it, as you said, for the donors, but also we need for the multiple, let's say, pool of the decision makers in different levels.
Yes, absolutely. You make really good points there. And we want to think about that so much, not just at the end of our research, but as we go about conducting our research. What are the questions and the gaps that really need to be answered in order to increase understanding and to cause change, and within what community or what decision makers need to have that information. And so, yeah, really good point. So, who's going to hear it? Like, maybe the donors want certain things, but like what is the best venue and the way to ask questions and methodologies for policymakers, decision makers, technocrats, elected officials, and how do we access them? So I think that's really, really important. And you make good points there. Thanks for sharing that. We have about 15 more minutes. People feel free to drop off if you need to for other calls, work, end of the day in Turkey. I'm just really grateful for everyone's joining today, participating in the chat, raising your hand, participating in the polls. And this is just the first of our research webinars. I hope we can do more like this in the future, and we can get to know one another and really collaborate on research going forward. We'd invite feedback on this. We will be sending out, with the PowerPoint deck, we'll be sending out a survey as well. And since this is something that's new to us, would love to hear your thoughts on what's useful, what's less helpful, what you want to see more of. And we really value that feedback in everything that we do, so we can improve for the future. But I'm happy to stick around for anyone who wants to chat and talk about specific research questions or projects you're working on. Can we mention something about visiting the results in infographics or
visualizing?
video?
Sorry, I mentioned visualizing the results.
Yes. Do you mean like the best way to approach doing that, the usefulness of it? Can you give me a little?
Maybe best practices according to your lessons learned, or what we can do regarding that. Is it also, as you mentioned when you mentioned about research, is it teachable? It is good for the audiences, some audiences who can impacted more in this kind of maybe products.
Yes, no, exactly. I think that I can't imagine an audience outside of maybe a highly academic journal where an infographic, visiting the results in an infographic is not beneficial. So it's something that I am not as skilled at, but something trying to work with other partners to do more. As we all know, when we read things ourselves, like seeing things in an infographic format or with icons or in some easier to digest way. Like you said, Mohammed, I think in an earlier comment, like even in an executive summary, having clearer language, anything that's simpler, bullet points, icons, infographics, makes it easier for people to digest what we're sharing with them. And so I think that's generally a best practice. to include in many of our reports, and at least in the dissemination of them, maybe in Instagram or presentations alongside them. Something that, like, as a researcher, I've been trained in research and writing, but not necessarily in any graphic design elements. So something that is more difficult for me to do and many others in our community. There's a couple things that I do to help. One is I use Canva. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Canva, but it's an online tool that has a lot of like pre-done slides, icons, frameworks, and it's easy for somebody like me who doesn't have those skills to sort of customize things. So that's one way I'll try to do things myself. Second, if there is time and budget, I find it's very useful to work with a graphic designer if possible. Again, can be expensive, but there's also a lot of like online platforms for people you can hire around the world to do things quickly. And these people are especially trained in saying like, I tell them, here's what I'm trying to convey. And they can often, in a short time period, put something together that helps convey that better. And I've had great success in the past working with graphic designers. And I've used people, that I've never met from all around the world. And I know in Turkey, there's quite a few good ones as well. And so it just often depends on budget, but I find that can be really useful. And a way to just also like share resource across many formats, across LinkedIn, across PowerPoints, across whatever report you're sharing out. Great question. Mohammed, what are you all working on right now? Are you working on a current research project? All right, if there's no other questions or comments, I think we can close down this Zoom. I really appreciate the chance to connect with all of you. And yeah, we're available if you want. I'll put my email in here. We're available for future discussion as well. Thanks, everyone.